The 1956 2 shillings coin, more commonly called a British florin, was a pre-decimal circulation coin struck by the Royal Mint in London for use in the United Kingdom. Before decimalisation in 1971, the British monetary system used pounds, shillings and pence, and 2 shillings was equivalent to 1/10 of a pound or 24 old pence, a denomination that had been in continuous use since the 19th century and carried significant everyday purchasing power in its time, but after 1971 was designated as 10 new pence and remained legal tender in Britain until 1993, when a smaller 10p coin replaced it as the circulating decimal equivalent, meaning that a 1956 florin stayed in official use for nearly 4 decades after it was first minted. On the obverse, front, of the coin is a youthful right-facing portrait of Queen Elizabeth II wearing a laurel wreath in her hair. This is known as her first portrait, designed by Mary Gillick, and around the edge runs the Latin legend Elizabeth II Dei Gratia Regina, which translates as Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. This Latin phrase reflects a long tradition on British coins of invoking divine sanction and legitimacy for the monarch, and during Elizabeth II's early reign the exact wording was slightly shortened from earlier examples to reflect evolving Commonwealth relationships, focusing on the Queen's title without listing all dominions by name. On the reverse, back, the central feature is a Tudor rose, the historic floral emblem of England, surrounded by thistles, Scotland, shamrocks, Ireland, and leeks, Wales, symbolic representations of the nations of the United Kingdom, with the inscriptions FID Def, abbreviation of Fidei Defensor, meaning Defender of the Faith, a title granted to English monarchs since the time of Henry VIII, followed by 2 shillings and the date 1956, and in small letters the initials of the designers Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas. The coin is made of cupronickel, a copper-nickel alloy, a base metal alloy introduced after World War II when silver was removed from most British coinage, and it measures about 11.31 grams in weight with a diameter of approximately 28.3 to 28.5 millimeters, a reeded, milled edge, and no mint mark because all regular circulation florins were struck at the main Royal Mint in London, Llantrisant, Wales, with a mintage of about 47.8 million pieces. The 1956 florin is considered a common issue in terms of collector scarcity, so most examples are easy to find in collections, coin sets, or old coin hoards, and while condition, grading, heavily influences any collector value, ranging from modest amounts for worn examples to modestly higher prices for coins in very fine or uncirculated condition, it generally does not command high premiums because so many were produced. Still, it remains a popular collectible for enthusiasts of British coinage and 20th-century numismatics because it captures both the early reign of Queen Elizabeth II and the last decades of Britain's long-standing pre-decimal money system, serving as a physical link to everyday economic life before the switch to the modern decimal system. Next top. The 1962 2 shillings coin, often called a florin, was part of the pre-decimal British currency system, where £1 was equal to 20 shillings, and 1 shilling was equal to 12 pence, meaning this coin was worth 2 shillings or 1/10 of a pound, a meaningful denomination in everyday British commerce before decimalisation in 1971 and retained as 10 new pence until it ceased to be legal tender in 1993. In 1962 the florin was struck at the Royal Mint in London in cupronickel, copper-nickel, alloy, chosen after World War II to replace earlier silver coinage because of cost and durability, and it measured about 28.3 millimeters in diameter, weighed approximately 11.31 grams, and had a reeded, milled edge as part of its standard machine-made features, with a total mintage of roughly 35.1 million pieces, making it a common and widely circulated coin rather than a rare collector's item. On the obverse, front, of the 1962 florin is the first portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, a youthful right-facing bust wearing a laurel wreath, designed by Mary Gillick, and surrounded by the continuous Latin inscription Elizabeth II Dei Gratia Regina, which translates to Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. This phrasing reflects the long tradition in British coinage of recognizing the monarch's divine right and regal status, and it was simplified from earlier longer titles to acknowledge changes in the British Commonwealth. On the reverse, back, is a rich floral composition surrounding a Tudor rose, the traditional emblem of England, with linked thistles, Scotland, shamrocks, Ireland, and leeks, Wales, representing the nations within the United Kingdom, and around this design are the abbreviated Latin phrase FID def, Fidei Defensor, meaning defender of the faith, the denomination 2 shillings, in the year 1962, with the reverse designer's initials EF, Edgar Fuller, and CT, Cecil Thomas, above the denomination, all combining heraldic symbolism and classical inscriptions that tie the coin visually and historically to British royal and national identity. The florin series itself dates back to 1849 and was originally intended to promote decimal thinking by being exactly 1/10 of a pound, a concept that British currency did not fully implement until 1971, and these 20th-century florins are historically interesting as tangible links to everyday monetary life in the mid-20th century, used by people in shops, markets, and daily transactions across Britain and even beyond in British territories. In terms of collectability and value, the 1962 2 shillings is generally considered a common coin, so most circulated examples today are worth modest amounts, often just a little more than face value to collectors, and only in high grades, fine, very fine, extremely fine, or uncirculated, might it fetch a bit more on collector markets, with typical price estimates ranging from small fractions of a pound up to a few pounds depending on condition, demand and market trends. Because it contains no precious metal, its intrinsic metal value is simply that of cupronickel, and its primary interest for collectors is historical and aesthetic rather than numismatic. Next top. The 1965 2 shillings coin from the United Kingdom is a piece of pre-decimal British coinage that once formed part of everyday money in Britain before decimalisation in 1971, when the currency system moved from shillings and pence to 100 pence to the pound. For many years afterward it remained legal tender alongside the new coins until it was finally demonetized in 1993. This coin is commonly called a florin, a denomination introduced in the 19th century that was worth 2 shillings, which is equivalent to 1/10 of a pound sterling, or in old money terms, 24 old pence, and it's circulated widely with relatively high mintage, about 48.7 million coins produced in 1965. Making it a common issue for collectors today. The obverse, front, of the coin features the first portrait of Queen Elizabeth II facing right, wearing a laureate wreath in her hair. This portrait was designed by Mary Gillick and depicts the young queen early in her long reign. Around her head is a Latin legend plus Elizabeth II Dei Gratia Regina, which translates as Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen, with Dei Gratia meaning by God's grace and Regina meaning Queen. This style of inscription reflects the traditional way monarchs were titled on coinage and connects each coin to the idea of the sovereign's legitimate right to rule. The reverse, back, shows a Tudor rose at the center, the national floral emblem of England, surrounded by thistles for Scotland, shamrocks for Ireland, and leeks for Wales, representing the 4 nations that make up the United Kingdom. Above the floral design are the letters FID, def, an abbreviation of the Latin phrase Fidei Defensor, which means defender of the faith, a title that has been part of British monarch styles since it was granted to King Henry VIII by the Pope in the 16th century and maintained even after the English Reformation. Below this are the words 2 shillings and the date 1965, along with the tiny initials EF and CT for Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas, the artists who created the reverse design. The coin is made of copper nickel, 75% copper, 25% nickel, weighs about 11.31 grams, and has a diameter of around 28.3 to 28.5 millimeters with a reeded, milled, edge, all typical for florins of this period. Because the 1965 florin was struck in large numbers and in common base metal, not silver, its collector value is generally low, often only a few pounds to dollars at most depending on condition, with typical prices ranging from a few pence/centimes in very worn grades to a few pounds to dollars in uncirculated grades, though some specific mint sets or higher quality examples may fetch a bit more. This makes them popular as entry-level British coins for new collectors. Importantly, although the coin includes Latin texts like Dei Gratia and Fid Def, these are not magical or secret phrases but traditional legal and ceremonial titles reflecting the monarchy's historical and constitutional roles, linking this coin to centuries of British and Commonwealth coinage practices. Next top. The 1967 British 2 shillings coin, commonly known as a florin, is a pre-decimal United Kingdom coin that carried a face value of 2 shillings, equal to 1/10 of a pound sterling in the old pound SD system. This denomination was part of everyday British money right up until the move to decimal currency in 1971, after which these florins were reclassified as 10 new pence pieces and continued to circulate until they were finally demonetized on June 30, 1993. Struck at the Royal Mint in London, the 1967 florin was produced in cupronickel, an alloy of about 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving the coin a durable silvery look and a weight of approximately 11.31 grams with a diameter of about 28.5 millimeters and a milled, reeded, edge typical of many British coins. On the obverse, front, side is the laureate first portrait of Queen Elizabeth II facing right, designed by Mary Gillick. This youthful effigy shows the Queen wearing a wreath of laurel, and around it is the Latin inscription plus Elizabeth II Dei Gratia Regina, which translates to Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen, Dei Gratia meaning by the grace of God and Regina meaning Queen, reflecting centuries-old tradition in British and Commonwealth coinage to link the monarchs' authority to divine sanction. On the reverse, back, of the coin is a beautifully balanced design featuring a Tudor rose at the center, the heraldic rose symbolizing England, encircled by thistles, Scotland, shamrocks, Ireland, and leeks, Wales, representing the component nations of the United Kingdom. Above this floral grouping is the inscription FID, Def, an abbreviation of the Latin Fidei Defensor meaning Defender of the Faith, a title first granted to King Henry VIII and retained by British monarchs thereafter. And below are the words 2 shillings and the date 1967, along with tiny designers' initials EF, Edgar Fuller, and CT, Cecil Thomas. The florin design itself dates back to the Victorian era, 1849, when the denomination was first introduced as part of an early move toward decimalization, the word florin itself deriving from an Italian coin, and the particular design used for Elizabeth II's florins from 1954 onward remained largely consistent until 1967, the last year of regular circulation strikes, with a proof version also issued in 1970 for collectors. Because the 1967 florin was struck in millions of pieces, estimates vary around 22 million to nearly 40 million depending on counting method, and because its metal has no precious value, it is generally considered a common coin today, typically worth only modest amounts to collectors, often just a small premium over face value unless in unusually crisp, uncirculated condition. As part of the broader historical context, before the 1968 introduction of the decimal 10-pence coin, which was the same size and weight and initially circulated alongside florins, these coins were fundamental parts of British pocket change and reflect a long tradition of British numismatic art, Latin legends, and the evolution of the monarchies.